We live in an era of unprecedented noise. Not just the physical noise of traffic, sirens, and construction that fills our cities, but a more insidious kind of noise. The noise of mental clutter. The relentless barrage of notifications, emails, headlines, and demands that assault our consciousness from the moment we wake until the moment we collapse into restless sleep. We have become a civilization addicted to distraction, terrified of the void. We have convinced ourselves that movement equals progress, that busyness equals importance, and that silence is something to be feared. Because in silence, we are forced to confront the one person we have spent our entire lives running from, ourselves. This fear of stillness has created a paradoxical epidemic. We are more connected than ever, yet we feel more isolated. We have more time-saving devices than any generation in history, yet we have never felt more rushed. We are drowning in information, starving for wisdom. We have forgotten the ancient truth that the most profound answers do not come in a shout, but in a whisper. And to hear the whisper, the noise must stop. This is the story of a man who reached the breaking point of that noise, and his desperate journey to find the off switch. His name was Arthur Pendleton. By every external metric used in the Western world, Arthur was a resounding success. At 42, he was a senior partner at a prestigious investment firm in downtown Manhattan. He lived in a sleek penthouse overlooking Central Park, drove a German sports car, and wore watches that cost more than most people's cars. He was the man who had it all. But if you could peel back the layers of his expensive suit and look inside his mind, you would see a disaster zone. Arthur's mind was like the floor of the New York Stock Exchange during a crash. Constant screaming, panic, endless calculations, and a pervasive fear of losing everything. He hadn't slept a full 8 hours in 5 years. He survived on caffeine and adrenaline. His relationships were shallow transactional exchanges. He was perpetually exhausted, spiritually bankrupt, and deeply, secretly unhappy. He was running a race he couldn't remember entering, chasing a finish line that kept moving. The breaking point didn't come with a dramatic explosion. It came on a quiet, rainy Tuesday evening. Arthur was standing in his corner office on the 50th floor, staring out at the relentless river of yellow taxi cabs 20 stories below. His phone was buzzing on his mahogany desk. Another crisis, another deal, another demand. He looked at the reflection of his own face in the glass. He saw the deep lines around his eyes, the hollowness in his gaze. He didn't recognize the man staring back at him. In that moment, a terrifying thought crystallized in his mind. If I keep living at this speed, I am going to die without ever having truly lived. The noise in his head suddenly became deafening. It was a physical weight crushing his chest. He couldn't take one more email. Not one more fake smile. Not one more second of noise. That night, Arthur did something irrational. Something out of character. He packed a single duffel bag. He sent a brief email to his partners saying he was taking an indefinite leave of absence. And most importantly, he took his smartphone, his lifeline to the chaos, and locked it in his desk drawer. 48 hours later, Arthur stepped off a train in a remote village nestled deep in the Swiss Alps. The contrast was violent. Where New York was a symphony of aggression, this place was defined by what was missing. No horns. No sirens. No hum of electricity. Just the immense, imposing silence of jagged mountain peaks and the distant sound of glacier water. He had come here seeking a legend. He had heard whispers in elite circles of an old monastery hidden higher up the mountain pass, inhabited by monks who had taken vows of silence and were masters of the inner world. Arthur, being a man of action, decided he would simply buy the solution to his stress. He would hike up there, find the head monk, get this secret, and be back in Manhattan by Monday fixed. The hike to the monastery was brutal. The air was thin and the path was treacherous. Stripped of his usual distractions, Arthur's mind began to revolt. Without podcasts or business calls to drown them out, his anxiety screamed louder. You're throwing your career away. Everyone thinks you've lost your mind. You are weak. The silence of the mountains acted like a megaphone for his inner demons. By the time he reached the ancient stone gates of the monastery, he was physically depleted and mentally frantic. He found the abbot, the head teacher, tending to a small, meticulously kept garden near the edge of a cliff. The abbot was an elderly man whose face looked like wrinkled parchment, but whose eyes held an unsettling stillness. Arthur, out of breath and radiating nervous energy, rushed toward him. "Are you the teacher?" Arthur demanded. "I need help. My mind is broken. It won't shut off. I have money, I have success, but I have no peace. Tell me what to do. Give me a mantra, a technique, something to silence the noise." The abbot didn't immediately respond. He finished pruning a small bonsai tree, wiped his hands slowly on his robes, and turned to face the frantic executive. He didn't speak. Instead, he walked over to a large wooden barrel filled with rainwater caught from the mountain gutters. The abbot picked up a clear glass jar and dipped it into the bottom of the barrel. He scooped up water, but along with it he dredged up thick, heavy mud, decaying leaves, and silt from the bottom. He held the jar up to the sunlight. The contents were a chaotic, swirling brown mess. You couldn't see through it. It was opaque with filth. The abbot walked over to Arthur and handed him the heavy jar. "This jar," the abbot said, his voice raspy from disuse, "is your mind right now. You have come here asking for clarity. You want peace. Very well. Your task is simple. You must make the water in this jar crystal clear. But listen closely to the rules. You cannot use any tools. You cannot filter it. You cannot pour it out and add fresh water. You must clean it right here as it is in your hands." Arthur looked at the jar in disbelief. This was the great secret? A jar of dirty water? He felt insulted. He was a man who managed billion-dollar portfolios, and he was being told to watch mud. But he had come this far. He sat down on a cold stone bench and stared at the brown chaos. His first instinct, the instinct of a fixer, was to take action. He saw a large clump of leaves floating near the top. He carefully dipped his fingers in to pinch it out. But as soon as his hand entered the water, the turbulence disturbed the mud that was just beginning to settle at the bottom, swirling it back up into a cloud. The water became dirtier than before. Arthur pulled his hand back, frustrated. He thought, "Okay, maybe if I agitate it, the heavy stuff will separate." He gave the jar a gentle shake. It only made matters worse. The chaos intensified. An hour passed. Then two. The sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long, cold shadows across the monastery grounds. Arthur was freezing, hungry, and furious. His ego was bruised. He felt like a fool sitting there holding a jar of mud while the monks went about their silent duties, ignoring him completely. His inner monologue reached a fever pitch. "This is ridiculous. These people are frauds. I'm going back to New York." He stood up, ready to smash the jar on the ground and leave. At that moment, the abbot reappeared. He didn't look angry at Arthur's failure. He looked calm. He gently placed a weathered hand on Arthur's tense shoulder. "Stop," the abbot whispered. The single word hung in the cold air. "Stop trying to fix it, Arthur. Put the jar down." Arthur, defeated and exhausted, sighed heavily. He placed the glass jar on the flat stone bench in front of him. He let go. He slumped back against the monastery wall, closing his eyes, surrendering to the failure. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, just breathing in the cold mountain air, no longer trying to solve the puzzle. After some time, he opened his eyes and looked at the jar sitting on the stone. He gasped. Because he was no longer holding it, because his trembling hands were no longer transferring their anxiety into the glass. The water had become perfectly still. And in that stillness, the laws of nature had taken over. The heavy, thick mud had sunk to the bottom, creating a dense layer of sediment. The lighter debris had floated to the surface. And in the center, the water was becoming crystal clear. It was pristine, reflecting the twilight sky. The abbot sat down beside Arthur. They both watched the jar as the final few specks of dust settled. "Do you see now?" the abbot asked softly. "You could not clear the water by touching it. The more you interfered, the more you tried to force the mud down, the more chaotic it became. You cleared it only by leaving it alone." The abbot turned his gaze to Arthur. "Your mind is exactly like this jar. The mud is your stress, your deadlines, your regrets of the past, your fears of the future. When you feel that anxiety rising, your instinct, the instinct of the modern world, is to do something about it. You try to outthink your worry. You doom scroll on your phone to distract yourself. You work harder. You analyze. You fight. But Arthur, you are just shaking the jar. You are keeping the mud spinning. You are ensuring that you never have clarity." Arthur felt a tear roll down his cold cheek. The simple truth of it hit him harder than any complex business theory ever had. "Silence," the abbot continued, "is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of awareness. The only way to clear the cloudy mind is to stop stirring it, to sit, to be still, to allow the mud to settle on its own. Clarity is not something you create with force. It is something that reveals itself when you stop creating disturbance." Arthur stayed at the monastery for 3 weeks. He didn't become a monk. He didn't shave his head. He simply learned how to sit. The first few days were agonizing as his mind raged against the lack of stimulation. But slowly, like the mud in the jar, the noise began to settle. In that silence, he didn't just find peace. He found painful truths he had been avoiding for decades. He grieved for relationships he had neglected. He confronted the emptiness of his materialistic pursuits. The silence was a mirror, and it was difficult to look into. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't running away. He sat with the discomfort until it too settled. When Arthur returned to New York City, the noise was just as loud. The taxis still honked, the market still fluctuated wildly. But Arthur had changed. He walked through the chaos carrying a stillness within him. When a crisis emerged at work, instead of reacting with frantic energy, he would pause. He would mentally put the jar down on the table. He would let the immediate emotional mud settle, wait for clarity, and then act from a place of wisdom rather than reaction. He became better at his job, but he no longer needed it to define his soul. My friends, the truth is, we are all holding that jar. Every day the world shakes us. The news shakes us, our finances shake us, our insecurities shake us. And we run around frantically trying to push the mud down with more noise. If you are feeling overwhelmed today, if your mind feels like that swirling brown chaos, I challenge you to stop. Stop trying to fix your anxiety with more thinking. Step away from the noise. Turn off the screens. Go outside or sit in a quiet room. Put the jar down. At first, your mind will rebel. It will scream at you to do something. Ignore it. Just wait. Breathe. Trust the process. Slowly, inevitably, the dust will settle. And when the water clears, you won't just see the world differently. You will see yourself clearly for the first time. And that clarity is worth more than all the noise in the world.